Hello, everyone. My name is Mark Potter, and I've been a TV producer now for, let's see, 23 years. Started in 2001, and I learned at a place called KMVT15.org. Someday this show may air on that station. I'm not sure. It's a TV station in the greater San Francisco Bay Area. And what else can I tell you about? I can tell you a lot about it. I've been there all these years, although now I don't really go into the station anymore. What I do now is simply do work from home and send it in electronically, or my friend Jim will send it in electronically for me. A lot of things I want to say, and this may be part autobiography, part diary, part product review. It's just, it's just whatever I feel like talking about that particular day. So let's see. I want to introduce myself a little bit. So I'm originally from Ohio. I'm 74. Uh, Came from a town called Vermilion, Ohio, which is on Lake Erie. It's a kind of resort town. It's I grew up in the township, which is the part of Vermilion that's out in the country away from the small city of Vermilion. My dad bought a two-thirds of an acre back in probably the late 50s, 58, 59, 60, maybe earlier. And he just started building. He built a very small house with a concrete floor. We really did have an outhouse for a couple years, and we really did have kerosene lamps instead of electricity. But what I liked about it was my dad was taking a step to give us a little sense of freedom. He didn't like renting before that, before we bought that place, that piece of land. We were renting in town near the what used to be the elementary school back in the 50s. And so he built this little house. The way I remember it, and I don't know if it's true, but the way I remember it, he bought from someone in town. Back in those days, there was something called a detached garage. You put your car in a garage, but it was detached from the house. It sat back from the house, back in the lot. Kind of like the way Steve Jobs' home he grew up in was. And so what I remember, and it may be not true, is he bought that, tore it down, used that wood to build our house. So it was a very small house. But we were in now independent. We could pay on a mortgage instead of paying on a rent. Um, my dad had a friend that the Vermilion had an area called the Lagoons, and I think it's still there today. It's a somewhat wealthy area. It's where people with boats, small boats, can park them right at their house. Kind of in the backyard because the lagoons runs through the back of their backyard. And my dad had a friend that lived there who was a banker. And even though we were not very well off at all, I would use the word poor, but I don't know if that's appropriate. Pretty low income. The guy helped my dad, helped him finance the buying of the property and that kind of thing. And my brother and I, as kids, would go over and clean his boat for him. And his wife would then give us a Pepsi as a reward. That was back in the 50s and 60s. Um, So many things I could say. My childhood, is, as probably is already reasonably documented, was sometimes traumatic. And I think that's true for almost everybody, frankly. When I first came out into the world, I thought it was a big deal. But it turns out almost everybody's had trauma or even major trauma in their lifetime. So I went to the schools in Vermilion, Vermilion Elementary, and then Vermilion High School. I liked school a lot. I usually sat in the front row. Did not have good relations with the other students as far as I remember. There's other people who say differently. I have a friend who's organizing all the school reunions for our class, and she says something different. So my memory of it may be just my own making. Uh, my brother was older than me. His name was Martin. He passed away, oh, maybe about 9 or 10 years ago now already. But he did protect me in school. I was a very nerdy kind of kid, glasses, not very physically endowed in any way, uh, bad at sports. My brother was very good at sports. And he also just protected me in school, even though he was 4 years ahead of me. He made it known that, you leave Mark alone. And at that time, my name was Mark, but my family referred to me by a, uh, a bastardization of my middle name. My middle name is Isaac, and I had a great grandfather whose name was Shooter Ike because he was good with a rifle. And so my family called me Ikey. And many people in my inner circle today still address me as Ikey. And I kind of like the name. I've gotten more comfortable with it as I've gotten older. In my early adulthood, I didn't like it because it reminded me of my childhood. But yeah, I'm a writer. I've been writing for since about 1965. So I don't know if that's 50 years or 60 years. I can't remember now, or something. 40 years. I don't know. And I've had a few things published mostly on the internet. I write poetry that's absurdist and surrealist, and I write short stories. I've written a couple of nonfiction books, just manuscripts. I've never had them published. I've written a couple of novels, and they were absolutely deplorable, and I just threw them away, thankfully. But the nonfiction books, I think, came out a little better. If they were ever published, they would need a lot of editing and a lot of correcting. But still, I liked it, and I'm more than likely to turn that material into short videos, which I've done many times with one of them, and I've done it a couple of times with the other book. One of them is called Being, Listening, and Speaking Dynamics. It's about listening and speaking, of course. And the other book is called Meditations on Being Human. And that has to do with Zen and other forms of meditation. So there's a lot for me to say about my life. I could do 100 of these shows easily and still have more to say. But I'm like any person who's, you know, in their older years. I've had a lot of experiences. I worked at Stanford for 13 years as a blue collar person. Um, I worked running a machine, a copy machine. And at that time, which would have been 1977 to 1990, The machine that I ran was the 9000 series Xerox. So it started out as a 9200, and then later we upgraded the company. Stanford upgraded to a 94, and then a 9500, and then I think something else. And just before I left, if I remember right, they got the brand new machine, which was like a 5280 or something, which is I had trouble learning that one because I have a learning disability. So I'm going to be talking about a lot of things in this series, and I'm going to look at my time clock here now and then, make sure I stay on target. Uh, Sometimes I'll read poetry. Sometimes I'll talk about my journey with mental illness. I was finally actually diagnosed with mental illness in 1990, and I went on disability from Stanford at that time. So I was on disability from 1990 until I turned 65, which was 25 years later. Uh, I'll talk about my poetry sometimes. Of course, like you know already, I've been a TV producer for 23 years, so sometimes I'll talk about that. I've had other jobs, lots of other jobs. When I was 14, I started working uh, as a person mowing lawns for a one of our teachers at the school. He was our history teacher in high school, and I don't know. I think at 14 I may not have been in high school yet. I don't remember, but maybe it was 15. Uh, my memory is not that good, but I do what I can. This is my favorite Spider-Man T-shirt. I have lots of Spider-Man T-shirts. Lots. No, a few, 5 or 6. Anyway, uh, I have good memories of the years that I was at KMBT 15. That's a community access television station in Mountain View, California. They teach people how to do television. Uh, I was there a lot of years. I don't know. I think 2019 when COVID hit, and also that was a year that KMBT had to move to another location, so they lost their lease. And that is KMV, like Mountain View, KMVT 15.org is their website. And they also have a YouTube channel which you can get through their website. So I had so much fun and I felt so honored to be there. First year I was there, I won Volunteer of the Year. I came in almost every single day of the business week, Monday through Friday. And then years later, I won the Volunteer of the Year again. I think maybe 2006. And then many years later, I won a Lifetime Achievement Award. And we went through a lot of directors while I was there. When I first got there, we had what I would now call a large staff, probably 10, 12 people. And then at some point, there was a big shakeup, big financial shakeup. A lot of people were let go. I was always a volunteer, so but some of the paid staff was let go. Um, there's a lot of things I could say about that, but it was a rough time for everybody, frankly. I'm open to questions as long as they're not intrusive. I know the internet these days can be a good place, can be a brutal place, all kinds of stuff. So I have a little. Well, I can't say too much of that because this may get carried on the community access TV, and we're not supposed to talk about business related things on there. So I'll talk about that more in some other video that I'll put on a different channel. So I've got two YouTube channels. One of them is within the gigantic KMBT 15 channel. That's my show called In Our Community, and then I have another show that's more for business, and I won't mention the name of that right now. Anyway, it's wonderful to be with you guys. Uh, I might read some poetry. I might tell you about my mental illness, whatever comes along. And shows that go on KBT need to be half an hour shows. So even though it's probably boring to hear me talk, I will be talking for about 28 minutes or so to make sure I have the right format. Uh, Let me say a little about mental illness because it's dear to my heart. I had a breakdown in 1990. It was very strange. It happened very suddenly. I was working on the machine just like I always did. And suddenly I couldn't see. I couldn't see clearly. Let's put it that way. There's a character on TV, or used to be on TV, named LaForge on Star Trek. And he always saw things in just color blobs. And that was what was true for me at that moment. It just went into being blobs. And I remember our boss at that time, I was just a technician, so the boss wasn't there that day, but her boss was there at the shop, sitting at her desk. His name was Arnie, and he helped me. I found my way to his desk, and I said, "Take me to the hospital immediately." And he knew that was real, so he took me in, and I was hospitalized at Stanford's psychiatric ward. And I was there for a few weeks, and then I got out, obviously, with new medication. And I will tell you about many other hospitalizations, but it's true that I've been in the psychiatric hospital many times. I would say 10, 12, 15, a lot of times. And I have been in therapy all my life, ever since I was 19. So I feel like that helped kind of lessen the blow of a psychiatric break. Uh, so that's that piece. And I was diagnosed with 5 or 6 different conditions. And I've rarely been able to name all 5 at the same time. Let's see if we can find them. Clinical depression, PTSD. Uh, Boy, I'm drawing a bigger blank than usual. General anxiety disorder was diagnosed later. It wasn't part of this group of 5. Bipolar, disassociation, which is a very scary one for me. It really is quite disorienting. It's when your psychological self leaves your physical self. And long story how that works. I've tried to research it a few times. I've written about it a little bit, but to me it's rather elusive. So that's 5, but there's one missing because, like I say, the general anxiety disorder was something that came later or was diagnosed later. So I'm missing 1 in there. I don't know which one it is. So that happened. So I was, I went in and out of being psychiatrically sick for many years. in my older years here, I've seemed to go into the psychiatric hospital less. So I was in a couple years ago at El Camino. I've been in most of the psychiatric wards in the Bay Area. And I've been in El Camino a lot of times. And uh, I went in September of 2 or 3 years ago, was the last time I've been in a psychiatric facility. And, it's not a bad experience for me. There have been bad experiences, but as I like to say to my friends who worry about me, when you have a heart trouble, you go into the doctor. When you have the serious flu or a COVID, you go into the doctor. It's the same with mental illness. For a few years, back in a long time ago, I used to do some volunteering for a group called Momentum, which had a different, I think they were called Alliance at one point. It's a mental health group in Santa Clara County, here in California, part of the great, like I say, the Greater Bay Area. And it's kind of a post-hospitalization place. It's not a living facility like La Selva or someplace like that. It's you go in a couple times a week for a class or that kind of thing. And they had a speaking bureau. So I had gotten interested in speaking, public speaking, a while back, thanks to a friend who I will talk about later. And so, yeah, I think pauses in speech are fine, so I will pause sometimes. Uh, anyway, so they had a speaking bureau, and I, of course, offered to speak, and it was fun, and, uh, you know, was happy to do it. We always talked about our mental illness, and we were encouraging to other people, who couldn't get up and publicly speak. So it was a bureau. Several of us would go. Uh, I wish I knew the time. I have a timer on, but I don't remember how quick I pushed the button on it. So I'm trying to make this thing the right length of time. So anyway, that was very fun. And I liked our leader. We had a young lady who was our leader who had a master's from Princeton or Yale or someplace, and she was delightful. She guided us, and she booked all the appointments, all the speaking appointments. So that was fun. And one year at one of those events, I read one of my poems. I usually don't write long poems, but this happened to be a long poem. It was about a fictitious bird named a blue-tailed swan, and it was kind of a Christmas story. So that was fun. Uh, yeah, so like I say, in this series, there'll be one of these every once in a while, whenever I feel like making one. And, uh, what can I say? I already have two shows that have guests, so I probably will not have a guest on this series, I wouldn't think, unless somebody just wants to do it. So on my timer, we're coming up on 1 minute and 26 seconds. But like I say, I don't remember how soon I, I don't remember how soon I started that clock. So I think I'm going to sign off. Thank you so much for listening. I care about you guys. I've been on the local channel there for 20 more years, so just take care, and I'll be talking to you again. If you have questions, of course, I will put my information in the description box of the YouTube. Take care. Thank you so much.